Welcome everyone, just a pleasure to be with you all. Some people will know some of this information, but today I want to give you a crash course in conflict. So that's the task of our day, and how to work with and facilitate conflict. And I'm going to try and get out of the way of this board. But before I start, there's a couple of fundamentals that I want to catch us up on, and you probably know all about these fundamentals already, if we can just press that. And this is the famous goats. Remember the goats? And so if we have a look at the way the conflict works, we've got to see it in the larger framework of process psychology and process work. And if we don't view it within that, we're going to miss some of the nuances of the work together. So what I'm going to do first of all is talk to you about the goats. And as a very brief summary, there's a story of three billy goats gruff. And the three goats lived on one side of a river. On that river, it was rocky, you can see some rocks and crags, and they were happy there. And there was only one thing that was missing, and that was food. And if we think about any change process, because what I'm trying to do here is explain the change process. If we think about any change process, the key ingredient of change is disturbance. So as a consultant, when I'm looking at change, I'm focusing on disturbance. And the uniqueness of the models that I work with is that the idea of disturbance for most of us is to get rid of disturbance so we can go back to our old way of being. Right? So for example, if you have a cold, you think, let me get rid of this cold so I can get back to work. We don't think, what is the wisdom within the disturbance itself? In other words, why is it that the cold is coming up at this point in time? What is its message for me, and how can I grow from the symptoms that I'm experiencing? Now, no one wants the disturbance. It's not like we're saying, hey, welcome to a cold. It's really good that you got a cold. No one wants the disturbance, but given that we are disturbed, the question is, what is the opportunity in the disturbance for our own personal transformation, or in conflict, the transformation of the other? So the key for the goats at this point in time, did everyone get that? So the idea is that inherently within the disturbance itself, not in the overt presentation of it, but inherently within it, is a deep wisdom and understanding that once worked with and once unfolded, provides an opportunity for growth and development. Now, when we view it from that perspective, suddenly disturbance takes on another view. Suddenly conflict, where we're disturbed in conflict, or challenges take on another view too. So that's the key basic understanding of these goats. Now in the story, the goats are disturbed because there's no more food. So mostly goats like craggy areas, they like hillsides, they like jumping around, they like all of those things. But in this instance, the goats are disturbed and they're now challenged, and where they are at the moment, their usual way of being is disturbed, and they need to now cross the river. Now on the other side of the river, you see there's some flowers and grass. It's a great place to be. The goats can, if they cross the river, eat all that food. So sometimes, if we think about a disturbance again, sometimes we're disturbed by something and we have a vision of where we need to go. And sometimes we're disturbed and we have no idea where we're going. So often, for example, in a conflict, you're disturbed and you have no idea what's going to come of it. And so the key is, how do we work with the situation to create optimal benefit for all parties involved? What is the growth that each of us can pick up by virtue of it? Now, if this process is simple, it would be that we wouldn't have a whole training on it. So if you think about the goats, all they need to do is cross the bridge. Except underneath the bridge, let's see if it's coming now, lives a troll. And this troll's favorite food is goat. So suddenly we think, what on earth is going on that there's a troll underneath the bridge? What does it symbolize for us from the story that we're telling? And the troll is essentially all of those attitudes, all of the beliefs, all of the values, all of the structures that keep us and maintain us in our usual way of being. Now, some trolls are really helpful. For example, if you decide you're going to drop all your work tomorrow because you want to be liberated on the other side of the bridge, the troll might pop up and say, well, how are you going to eat? What will you do for money? See, some trolls are useful. See, it's a belief that says, hold on, don't throw everything away at the moment. What is going on? In other words, there's certain trolls that are maintenance trolls. And the other kind of troll is a limiting troll. So it's those trolls that just limit us from old beliefs or old values or old attitudes that are no longer needed by us. So they kind of keep us stuck in the way we were. And often those are the ones we want to work with. Those things that limit us, which make us smaller than we really have the potential to become. So the idea of the model is, and the ideas of the models of conflict that we're going to focus on today, but any disturbance is that it provides an opportunity for growth and development of the individual or the system. Okay, so as I mentioned before, where the goats are originally is their usual and familiar identity. On the other side of the river are emerging identity. What wants to emerge? Is that for all our pictures? Do we have anything else there? Aha, the edge. Okay. So the edge is something really, really special for me. It's something that's unique, I think, to the models that I use, process work models that I use, and I'm not aware of it in any other system. And the edge basically is that invisible boundary. It's modeled in terms of a river in the diagram. The invisible boundary between that which is known and that which wants to emerge. And it's not said, but we all know about the edge. And it's very simple to know about it. For example, if we went to Megumi on my left and said, Megumi, will you sing for us? How good are you at singing, Megumi? Not very good. Now, Megumi's done this exercise already, and you notice she's starting to smile and laugh, and the group starts waking up a little because we know we're taking Megumi outside of her usual way of being into something new. And you know I'm not going to make you sing, and yet it still elicits this reaction. So it's very interesting that when we're encouraged to go outside of our usual frameworks, we bump into the edge. And what the edge is saying is that there are trolls that are present. In other words, Megumi probably has a belief that she can't sing. Is that right? Or you can't sing very well. Or you should only sing in the shower, right? All of those things. Or you should sing when no one, I don't know what, these are mine, by the way, I don't know what are yours. but the idea is that what happens is that we have all of these inhibitors, or these values that limit who we are. Can you see they're limiting? So the sad thing about it is that we never have the opportunity to use our voice and to love the way we sound, however it is. I remember, I hope my son doesn't see this video, but I remember he's a great musician and he played guitar. And then he decided he wanted to sing. And he said, I'm going to sing too. His teacher said, it's no use just being a guitarist, you've got to be the front guy. You know, because the singer's always in the front. So you've got to learn to sing. And so he started practicing singing. It was really, really, really bad. It was like, I didn't want to listen to anything. Anyway, he's cultivated it. He's never going to be this extraordinary singer. It's just not his natural talent. But he's cultivated into being a damn good singer. And actually, I really enjoy his singing now. But it took work. But if I would have stopped him at that point in time and said, Rowan, please don't sing. It's like when the kids start learning the violin. You know what I mean? You say, no, 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 can I leave the house? And you know you've got to hold that. Because if you say to them, you sound terrible, you know they're going to not be able to pick up the violin again. Can you see what happens? In other words, they hit an edge, the trolls come out, they inhibit and limit behavior, and they keep us in our usual way of being. So we know, and some of that damage is quite profound, that somehow we get into all sorts of beliefs and self-limiting behaviors by virtue of these trolls and these edges that we have within us. And these, by the way, just in terms of the limits, and I know this isn't about conflict, but the breadth and limits is quite extreme. And it revolves a lot around the isms that we work on a lot in our society. For example, sexism. Like if women are seen to be less valuable in the workplace, in Australia, what percentage of income do women get in proportion to men for the same job? Do you know? 83% or something. In the States, it's about 70. So if you're not seen as valuable, it's a subtle message that says you're not worth as much. So you get all these messages, you're not as important as, you're not worth as much, you are not as good as. All of these messages begin to accumulate in us. So sometimes the messages are overt, and sometimes the messages are covert. Okay, everyone got the impact of the edge. So let me go back to the story for a moment, so we just finish the whole story, and then we'll move directly into conflict. So if we go back to the story, you've got the 3 goats, they're getting hungry. Now typically something interesting happens. As they begin to approach the edge, they say, we're going to have to go. We're hungry, let's cross the bridge. As they start approaching the edge, something very interesting happens, and you should know about this in working with people. It's called edge behavior. As someone approaches an edge, all sorts of edge figures come up, all sorts of trolls come up. All of the beliefs, all the values come up. As we approach the edge, anxiety increases. It's like, have you ever thought about doing something like dancing? And then I remember when I went to dance, and my partner said, come dance with me, and I'd never really learned any dancing beforehand. And I remember going there, and I felt really anxious. I felt I'm about to present in front of like 5,000 people or worse. It was like really scary, and like I thought my feet aren't going to go in the same direction, which they didn't, etc. But once I got through that, once you get through all of that edge behavior and you go over into the new identity, it feels very free. The skill is, once we approach the edge, and if you're working with people at that edge, we need to hold them as they move towards the edge. This is a gentle holding, not a force. You don't drag them onto the dance floor. It's not going to work so well. But you've got to hold them gently and say, I know it's hard, but let's try. Let's try a little so that they can actually cross the edge and move into the emerging identity. And if that doesn't happen, there's a cycling process that tends to happen where people approach the edge and then move back. Approach the edge and go around. And if you ever notice yourself stuck, you're almost like in a whirlpool of life, it's because you're probably at an edge. You move towards something and then you move back and you move towards it. And then the key is to either encourage over the edge or to work the trolls at the edge, find out what's stopping you from going there. Okay? So here's the goats. Eventually, the little goat decides, I've had it, I'm going to cross the bridge. Probably most people know the story of the 3 goats, 3 billy goats. We're changing the story to 3 goats. So the little goat gets the bridge, crosses the bridge. Troll jumps up and says, yummy, it's my breakfast. The little goat says, don't eat me, eat the next goat coming. And the troll looks and says, okay, you can go. So what is that little goat doing? It's negotiating with the trolls. So sometimes if beliefs come up, for example, you want to leave your job, you say, I'm leaving, and the belief comes up, what are you going to do about money? This is a good negotiation to have. You want to work these things out, because else it's foolish just to jump over the edge and find you don't have enough money. So sometimes negotiating with the trolls is good. There was a little negotiation. The second goat comes along, follows after the first goat, and the troll jumps up, says, yummy, you're now my lunch. The second goat says, don't eat me, the big juicy goat is coming now. And the troll looks and says, you can go. Another negotiation. Now something is really interesting about edges. The more you tend to cross the same edge, the less extreme and not as big that edge is. Have you noticed? If you do something once or twice, the third time it gets easier. Third goat comes along and says, I'm crossing the bridge. The goat jumps up and says, the troll jumps up and says, yummy, I'm going to eat you. The goat says, oh no, you're not, and bumps the troll. The troll falls into the water and drowns. And 3 goats cross the river and live happily ever after. Now the truth is in change, and I haven't added this before in my theory. The truth is in change, this is the beginning of the work. Because once we cross over, now we have to adapt, work on, and grow into this new form of being. And that takes a lot of work. It's a shift in identity, and it takes a lot of time, and there's a danger of shifting back into the old identity. For example, if we look at technology in organizations, Every single organization I've worked with has trouble with technology in the organization. Systems try and get implemented and they have trouble being implemented and they don't work effectively and there's all sorts of dramas that occur. And the reason is most people think once you've crossed the edge, you're all home and dry and you're just beginning. And most people at that point in time feel so frustrated by it, they just slip back to their own old usual way of doing things and want to discard the technology altogether. So that's just a learning in terms of the model, its application to a little piece of organizational conflict, actually, that occurs. Is that okay? All right. So now when we transform this and we look at it in terms of conflict, there's one key that I want you to think about whenever you're facilitating a conflict. Just one thing. It's very simple. And everything for me revolves around this one key. And the one key is accusations and accusation theory. And if we look at accusations, for me, the idea of an accusation doesn't need to be a whole big accusation or something that's really, I told you, you shouldn't do this or whatever, or you're a bad person because of whatever you're doing. They can be subtle. They can be implied. They can be hidden and somehow in the communication, although it's not expressly said. So the important thing to know about with accusations is in conflict, accusations are a form of feedback. They can be implied, they can be subtle, or they can be totally expressed. Someone might be nuanced in it. For example, you come home late and your partner's not talking to you. Not a very good nuance. Or you might notice that they're a little further in the bed than they used to be the night before. Or you notice that you don't get dinner the next night, whatever the game is that we're playing, you know what I mean? There's subtle nuances that occur. Or there's just an emotional withdrawal. Some things are, and there are forms of accusation. You know, you notice that you're working with something, you have a poor interaction, and the person is a little more distant the next day. Now, they're not saying anything, it's just implied. You did something that I'm unhappy about. But no one's discussing it. And if we don't discuss it, the impact is that things just tend to fade further and further away. The job is to be able to address those accusations that are occurring. So sometimes they may not even be evident. And sometimes, for example, you can go to the person and say, hey, are we okay together? The person says, sure, we're fine. Just stay on your side of the bed. Whatever it might be. Do you know what I mean? It says, sure, of course, everything is good. So sometimes people might not want even to address it, but it's coming in the form of what I call a double signal. Someone is saying everything is fine, and yet in the background there are issues that are present. So as facilitators, if we're working in this kind of area, the idea is you want to bring up those and slowly bring out the discussions or the issues or the accusations so they can be addressed. Now, one of the reasons people say everything is fine is that invariably conflict does not go well. Have you noticed? So if you're in a work environment and there's a conflict, it's better to say, sure, I'll put it on the side and move away from it than to truly open up and address the conflict. And yet, paradoxically, if you want teams working effectively together, if you want systems working effectively, if you want marriages for that matter, or relationships working effectively together, you need to have the courage to bring up those things that are difficult and talk about it towards resolution. The reason people avoid it is that it's not so easy to get to resolution. And so a lot of our work today is to get towards that resolution. The reason that conflicts are so hard and accusations are so hard is if someone accuses me of something, every part of my being wants to defend myself. Now, I could be alone, but I probably am not in the room. Anyone else have that? I feel hurt. Why? Because you criticized me. Because you don't think I'm perfect. I don't know what's going on inside me because I don't think I'm perfect now. I should never have to grow. Or maybe I've been so traumatized historically by feedback that I just close it down. Whatever the reason, there's a tendency towards conflict to be defensive. As facilitators, we need to know about it. As practitioners of conflict and working skillfully with it, we need to watch that very carefully and be big enough to be able to get bigger than who we are. It takes a lot of courage to grow. And conflict calls on that in us to grow. And there's a rule that I'm going to get to, and if we have time, we'll do a little exercise on it at the end of the presentation today. But there's a rule I get to, and this is the rule that I try and work with. It's the 2% rule. Even if the other person is a total idiot, or the whole group is an idiot for that matter, that other group, like look at the United States at this point in time, in politics, there's an election in about 2 weeks, the other group is the idiot, whatever group you're in. The consistent view is the others don't know what they're doing. I'm going to try and digress from politics because it's very easy for me to go there. So I'm going to stay away from it. But you can see how it's so easy to put accusations on the other and give them 100% responsibility for it. The key is find the 2% that is your growth. If you're working with clients, see if they can pick up 2% of the responsibility for it. The more people pick it up, the more effective it is. If I'm in a personal conflict, I take 100% responsibility for it. And my hope is if the other person takes 100% responsibility, we'll be able to work it out. If they don't, I'll just grow by myself. That's okay. Because it gives me an opportunity for growth. Can everyone see how we're shifting the idea of conflict being needed to be avoided to conflicts to be something that can actually transform us? Okay? So the 2% rule says most of the time, 2% of the accusation is true, even if the other 98% is theirs. And when I say most of the time, there are the rare instances where you've got to put your foot down and say, nope, conflict or no conflict, I'm standing for what I believe to be right. I'm not against that view, but as a rule of whatever, a rule of working on issues, that 2% is a helpful thing to do. Okay. Is everyone okay so far? All right. I'm downloading a lot of information. Is that good? Mark, yeah.
You seem to imply that one way of looking at the situation is to say, so what's my 100% responsibility for this? Like accepting that it's helpful to look at yourself as being the cause of it.
Yes. Well, there's many, many ways of managing conflict.
Sometimes that's really disingenuous. I mean, it can kind of seem
right.
That's just a glib
Well, if we go back, let's go back to the previous slide for a second. So the question, in case we can't hear it on the video, is it a bit disingenuous to actually take 100% responsibility for something, or even 2%, when you don't feel it? Now, I want to challenge our identity just for a moment. Because you see, in terms of authenticity or being genuine with ourselves, we can only do so to the point that we know who we are. But there's going to be certain behaviors or certain ways of being which might well be ourselves that we don't even know exist yet. And this is quite a shock to get. So someone can give us feedback and we feel, well, that's not me. And it's a blind spot. So it looks just disingenuous, but if we begin to explore it more honestly, we can find that that which looks like a blind spot actually has a whole lot of wisdom for us. So what I noticed in me is the more I protest about the feedback, the more I resist the feedback, the more I block it for whatever reason, the more likely it is to be true. Just seems to be. The bigger the reaction, the more trouble. And so for me, around being genuine or not, it depends on our ability to know ourselves. And none of us are fully comprehensive of all of what we do and who we are. So this is just an opportunity to explore that 2%, if not 100%. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to flood you with a whole lot of thoughts. Is it okay I'm moving really fast? Huh? The reason I want to move really fast is I've got a lot of information I want to cover in a short period of time. So I want to go to the next slide and give you a whole toolkit on working with conflict, where accusation is the theme and the major key of it. And the accusation comes in the message at the top. Okay, so now I'm going to take it as a two-party conflict just for a moment, although it could be two groups in conflict with each other. And if we're going to work through conflict in terms of accusations, the first group I'm going to work with, and we're only going to think about for a moment, is the one who sends the accusation. So that's the first people that we're going to look at. And there's a number of things that I want to suggest, even before we work with conflict. If I'm really irritated, if I'm angry, if I'm reactive, that's the very time when I want to send that damn message. And it's the very time when you don't send, when you don't want to send it. You know those emails that you send? And you say, I'm going to say it, I'm going to do it, right? You say, okay, bang. And then you think, let me read that email again. I think it wasn't as harsh as I actually read into. Anyone ever done that? Is that just me? Frank, you've never done that?
No, it was a great quote by Bill Ury. It says, the best message you'll ever regret.
Right. The best message you'll ever regret. That's right. So for me, the first key is you got to get spacious. When I talk about spaciousness, it's something I work with a lot in my trainings, but you got to get big. You got to feel breathing in, get perspective. When something crashes on you, it's very easy to only see that and get very convergent, very focused on this issue, and it consumes everything. We get overwhelmed by the issue. So you've got to step back, you've got to have a little space, get a little spacious, and just breathe in, because it will give you a bigger perspective of the issue. It's like conflicts. Have you ever had a conflict with someone and you think, at the end of it, what was that all about? Why did I even get into it? So that's because we weren't spacious. It can avoid lots of troubles. Not that we want the spaciousness to avoid doing the work that needs to be done, but we got to first get spacious. The second thing is do our own work. And this is easier said than done. But remember I said a few minutes ago, if I'm in reaction, if I want to send that email, if I'm in a mood, 99% of the time, I need to work on myself more than I need to work on the other person, because I'm caught. So whenever I'm caught, the rule is I'm caught and I have work to do. This is the way I see the world from my perspective, and the way I want to encourage you to look at the world. That where we're caught, we have work to do. And so the work we got to do is, if we're going to do the work we got to do is find out, why is it that I'm caught? What am I in reaction to? How does it connect into my own personal history? What is it that I have to grow in? And when I work on my own growth, which can take multitude of forms, sometimes the conflict might actually disappear. So the first trick is, if you can really work on yourself, it might disappear. But I want to caution on this just for a moment, because some of us have a tendency to work only on ourselves and never on another person. From the old model, remember the Billy Goats model? The old model says, what is your usual way of being? If your usual way of being is to always work on yourself, then you might think, oh, it's an edge to actually share my accusation. Can everyone see that? It still means we do our work, because it will better prepare us for the relationship conflict, or the two-party conflict, or the group conflict we're in. Still do our work, but then come out. So I'm going to caution only for doing your own work and stopping. Although for me, I tend to work on the other before I work on myself. Anyone else like me? I tend to work on the other. Much more convenient if I can blame someone else for it. Then I don't have to grow. So I tend to work on the other before I work on myself, especially if I can justify it. And I've learned really hard with all my training in psychology, organizational consulting. I have lots of justification for almost every argument I ever have. But the truth is, I need to work on myself the vast majority of the time. And when I've done that, often I don't need to work on the other. So that actually might resolve the whole conflict. Okay, next one. Get clear on the message and the double signals in the message. Sometimes what happens, and there's a whole lot of models around this, but you need to say, what is it that I want to express? What is my message to the other person? And I put the SBI model with delivering the message, because it's connected. It was, first of all, what is it that I want to share? What actually am I bugged by? What is my major concern that I'm wanting to communicate to the other? And it's not just, you're driving me crazy. That doesn't help anyone. It's just a reaction. The question is, this is very difficult because, and specifically, you need to really think, what is difficult? How do I get beyond my emotional reactivity to the actual message that's coming? Now, what's very important for me is that I tend to first have a feeling, and then I have to translate it into what's actually going on. Each of us learns in different ways. Others might already digest intellectually what's going on. But for me, I've got a little extra piece of work. It doesn't feel good. There's something that's a little off in the interaction, and then got to work out what it is. So if you have that particular style like mine, you've got to sit with the feeling, trust the feeling, and think, what exactly is it that's going on? Get spacious, what is my work, do my work, sort out this feeling until I can get really clear, aha, that's what I notice I want to respond to. And then I'm able to communicate it. Everyone got it? Okay. The next thing is when you communicate it, deliver the message well. And there's so many hundreds of models that you can do. SBI model is a great model. Situation, behavior, and impact. Do people know it? So SBI model is simple. First of all, describe the situation. Don't generalize. That's the rule. Talked about the specific situation. So if you, for example, have an accusation towards someone and it says, you're always like dominating the discussions, it's not going to help the person. You have to say, yesterday in the meeting that we had at 11 o'clock between John and Mary and Paul, you said this and this and this, and I noticed you weren't interested in the discussion back. You cut off the feedback. Can you see I'm getting very explicit? This is, first of all, I'm describing in the specific situation, John, Paul, and myself, or whatever it might be, and you and I, that's the actual situation at 11 o'clock. Then I'm going to describe the actual behavior. You shared something, I wanted to give you feedback, and you cut me off. That's the actual behavior. In this model, can everyone see the difference? Situation, actual behavior, and this model, then you look at impact. The effect on me is that I felt like my views and my feedback is not valuable and important. Can you see? You're owning the reaction inside yourself. I add one little piece to it, and I actually changed the acronym to SIN. So you can try this too, of adding an N to it, which is the need. Because sometimes people don't know what you would prefer. So sometimes saying, this is the impact, I felt it would have been, the impact is I felt like my voice wasn't heard. And then you can say, my need in the situation would have been to have some space to give you feedback so you could hear it and actually digest it, because I believe it will make the proposal more effective. Can everyone see that? So I'm actually adding N to it. And so I tended to squish situation and behavior together, and the acronym I had was SIN. So if you want to try that one, I like the acronym of SIN. Everyone get what the work is of the sender? Okay, if you're a receiver, the first trick you've got is you got to get spacious. Remember I said, if anyone ever gives me feedback, my first reaction is to defend myself. So the first trick is you got to get spacious. Don't kill the messenger. Remember that old it was not even an acronym, an old statement. Don't kill the messenger. It's very easy to have 100 reasons why what they're saying is inaccurate. Oh, we killed the messenger. There it is. Okay. Don't kill the messenger. Very, very easy to justify why they have no legitimacy in giving you the message. And just with regard to that, what I've noticed is that the more I've developed in my profession, the better I am at killing the messenger. So the more years you've got as a consultant, as a psychologist, as a practitioner, the more likely you are to kill the messenger. So you've got to watch this one. It's a big temptation, and actually it's a misuse of our knowledge. Okay? Now the third one is defend yourself as necessary. And I'm going to separate this for a moment. I'm going to tell you why defending yourself is important. Many of us have been diminished in very difficult interpersonal interactions. And so if we just listen to the other and put ourselves aside, it's too much, and in fact counter to our own development. If we think about the trolls, if you're a person on the usual side of the river that has a tendency to always listen to the other and not stand for your own view, it might be that in this conflict, it's time you took a stand. So if that's your tendency, then actually defending yourself and standing strongly for your view becomes really important, irrespective of the situation. I remember there was a moment, the founder of Process Work, I had a very good relationship, I still have one, a good relationship with the founder. Many years ago, I'd worked with him. He actually used to be my therapist as well. And I'd worked with him for many years. And one day he came in and he wanted me to do something. And I was finding my own voice. And always he would suggest what to do, and I'd say maybe he's got a point of view, and I'd follow him. But this day I decided, no, it wasn't right. So I said, no. He said, why not? You know the theory of how this works. I said, no. He said, why not? And I said, because it's against my moral values. And what I was saying to him at that point in time is that in relationship to you, I've tended to put myself aside and listen to your views all the time. But for now, I now need to defend myself and stand for my own. Can everyone see that? Now, mostly I'll tend to defend myself, and I could be open, but in that context, I actually needed to stand for myself. Can everyone see that? Once you've defended yourself, the idea is to listen deeply to the accusation. And when I say deeply, what I mean by listening to the accusation is sometimes you hope you've got a perfect sender who's calm, who's done their own work, who's got clear on their message and is delivering it impeccably. That never happens. Most people just say, you're a dumb idiot or something. And that's the accusation. What am I supposed to do with this? So you've got to work with the accusation to help the person to get clear on exactly what is it they're upset with or they'd like to give you feedback about. Everyone got that? And often what the delivery is very, very poor. So you've got to wrestle with that delivery to make sense of it. And I remember even standing across, I was actually in a group with a colleague of mine. He was very upset with me. I was working as the president of the institute at the time, the Process Work Institute, and he was very upset with me about something, and I didn't do what he said. And I said to him, I can get why you're critical, but in that context, I don't believe I did it. But I think over there I might have. Could it have been that? And he said, yeah, that's it. And that was very helpful for us. Okay. So the idea is to listen deeply to the accusation, and if you need to wrestle with it, to find as much meaning as you can from that. Okay? And then once you've wrestled with it, explore it and see, can you pick up at least 2%? The truth is, in the majority of situations, I can pick up much more than 2%. I can pick up 100%. But can you pick up at least some validity in terms of your contribution to this conflict and what you can do better, even if 98% is the others? And you won't believe how much of an impact that has. In other words, unfold the secondary or unfold the emerging identity to insight. So the emerging part of ourselves, unfold it, work with it until you get to insight. Okay. Now there's something very special that happens at this point in time. I want to give you a couple of models around that, or examples to show you what happens. Imagine, let's make a simple, complex, simple example. Imagine you have a partner, and I like this example. You have a partner and you come home from work. And you say you're coming home at 7 o'clock and you come home at 9 o'clock. Or 10 or 11 or 12 or 3, whatever the story is, okay? So you come home late, all right? And you walk in the door and your partner is now extremely angry with you for not, and they say to you, I'm really upset. You said you'd be home at 7 and you're home at 9. I feel disrespected. I feel uncared for. I feel you're inconsiderate. The whole list of everything you've ever done in the relationship now comes up. But let's put that on the side for a moment. They give you some feedback. Now, what's really interesting is you can probably find more than 2% of that. But you can see there was a disrespect in not connecting with them and letting them know you're going to be late and clearing it with them and just going ahead because something was more important at that moment than they were, and that's what they feel. Everyone got that? So you can really own that. But imagine you own that and you say, it's true, I had a lot of work to do at work. I could have called you, I'm very sorry, etc. They say, thank you, I feel heard, and it won't happen again. They say, thank you, I feel heard. The apology is good. We'll get to apologies in a moment. And they feel satisfied. But there's still a missing question. You see, coming home at 9 o'clock is a subtle accusation in itself. Can everyone get that? It's a non-verbal one. The question is, why were you home at 9 o'clock without calling? So once they've completed, they've accused you, you've owned it and picked it up, there might well be a re-accusation that's coming. And the re-accusation could be something like, well, the truth is, I didn't really want to come home. Now that's getting interesting, isn't it? Because of something that's going on in our relationship, or I'm trying to avoid. Can everyone see that? So the double signal of saying I'm going to be home at 7 o'clock and coming home at 9 o'clock, not only are they upset by me coming home at 9 o'clock, but in the double signal itself of 7 and coming home at 9 instead of 7, I actually have a re-accusation for them. So often when the one party is completed, this is the moment where the other party will be receptive. But your timing is impeccable. If you do this too quickly, they don't feel heard and you're so busy with yours before they've actually done theirs, you're going to cycle. Remember I told you about cycling? When the goats move towards the bridge and then they come back, you're going to cycle. So if something doesn't resolve, it's because we moved way too quickly. Okay? Everyone got that? Can you see how reaccusations work? This is a crash course in conflict. Okay, so can everyone see how accusations are a key part of our theory so far? So I'm going to add a few more things to it. Edges. Remember I said we get to the edge as you cross the bridge? Edges are present everywhere in conflict. There's edges to bring up issues. There's edges to be clear. There's edges to get spacious. There's edges to deliver the message well. There's edges to actually not defend and not receive it. You know what I mean? To defend and not receive the message. There's edges to be spacious if you're the receiver. There's edges in terms of defending yourself or being receptive to the message. There's edges in terms of deeply understanding the message. And there's edges in reaccusing the other person. There's edges everywhere. So if we have a look at conflict not being successful, I'm not surprised. It's really hard to do well. So the message of this whole presentation is don't go near conflict. But if you have to, if you have to, know that there are edges everywhere in conflict. Okay, next message is a conflict is never neutral and equal between two parties, ever. There's many social issues, psychological issues, moral issues. There's a whole lot that is contaminating the conflict. And to think that it's immutable or it's indifferent, from any of the environment in which we live is just silly. So if there's a conflict and you're in interaction, what will play out in the conflict is who you are and your relative power positions in the moment, in a larger context outside of the moment, and in the history of your own experience and their experience together and apart. Can I give you a few examples? One of them that's coming up really big at the moment with the Me Too movement is, of course, gender. So if a man and a woman are in conflict, there's a whole lot of power dynamics that are part of that relationship, but also are brought to the relationship by virtue of each party's personal history. They're not immune from that, and nor can they be seen as immune. You can't say, look, your life is yours, my life is mine, and I'm just being me and you being you. All of that stuff is going to come into the relationship by virtue of all of our personal history and personal experiences with each other, but also with the different gender, for example, outside of it. Can everyone see that? But you see, if it was just that, it would be easy. But imagine we have something else that's playing simultaneously at the time. Imagine that the person with more positional rank is the woman. So a man and a woman get together, they have a conflict, but the woman has more positional rank at the moment than the man. So then that's also playing in. Can everyone see that? So thinking that conflicts are simple There's a diversity of forces that are playing in. Often many of them that are playing out, in the situation are invisible. They're not talked about, but they're present in the discussion. Making it even more complex than all the social issues are the psychological issues that are present. One party might feel more abused interpersonally than the other, or more repressed interpersonally than the other. So they might not be able to even get their voice out or even share what they're feeling. I remember there was a man in a group that I was working with, a men's group, and he started sharing what's going on for him, and then he started having tears. And he said, "Oh, I must be sad because I noticed a tear falling down my face." So his experience, he had lost access to his feeling side. And the only way he could identify is by some of the somatic presentations of his body, because he was so disconnected from it. So he'll have trouble in a feeling conflict interaction. Can everyone see that? By virtue of his history, although he's a man. So can we see the complexity of all of these variables playing together? As well as that, of course, we have a moral position, and sometimes we might feel very self-righteous in a conflict. I feel I'm standing for this because no one's ever stood for it before, and I have to stand for it, and there's a certain power, and how we use that power becomes really important too. We can use it well, and we can use it poorly. So this is a whole seminar in itself. That was 2 minutes of a condensed version of how these complex mechanisms play out in conflict themselves. A couple of skills I want to let you know about conflict too. The first skill that I want to let you know about is the skills of escalation and de-escalation. If I'm working with a conflict, one of the key things I want to look at is noticing escalation and de-escalating signals. If I'm working in individuals, if I'm working with a group. I don't want things to escalate out of control. So what typically happens in escalations is one person accuses the other person of something, and then the other person counter-accuses the other without any work. Okay? Boom, boom. So for example, you walk in the door, the example of 7 p.m. at night and coming home at 9 p.m. You walk into the door and your partner says, "I wasn't sure if you're coming home tonight." And you think, "I've been working all day and that's the voice I get?" Can you see what's happening? It's a counter-accusation. You're off to the races. And the partner says, "You should talk. What do you think I'm doing? Like, what do you think? I don't work?" You say, "I don't like the way you talk to me." "Well, I don't like the way you talk to me." Can you see? Counter-accusation after counter-accusation, and you can see the conflict is escalating. As conflict escalates, it's important that as a facilitator, we notice it. Now, I tend to stop as quickly as I can at the earliest possible escalation. So if I'm facilitating two parties and there's an escalation, I want to stop right there and say, "Whoa, hold on. You said something about coming home late. Can we start there?" Can everyone see that? I don't want to let it go nutso, because once it's nutso, it's off to the races and people get even more hurt. So I tend to slow things down. You're at a hot moment, and that can happen in groups too. There's an escalation in a group through an accusation. Slow it down and try and make sense of who is able to pick up the 2% first. It's not always the person who initially gives the accusation, but see if one person can pick up the 2% before the other person can. Now, escalation and de-escalation can be very, very helpful in conflict. So, for example, I've intervened in conflicts. I'm not suggesting anyone do it, but I remember probably many people know the story. I was in Japan. I just taught a seminar on conflict. I'm walking through the airport on my way to my gate, and I'm pulling my bag, and there's many people, like it's pretty crowded at Narita Airport. So I'm pulling my bag, and there's a guy next to me, two Japanese guys. The one guy bumps the other by mistake with his bag. And the other guy comes around, I don't know if I've told this to most people, I think I have, comes around with a corner house kick, like wham, and he kicks him. Boom, his bag and him, and he takes the guy out, but hard. And the guy's like jumps off the floor, and then they're both in martial arts positions. And I think, this isn't going well. And I don't have any belts. So I said, what am I going to do? The only benefit I had is that I'm not Japanese, and I have about 3 words in Japanese. So this wasn't going to be a big verbal interaction. And I went to, I came in. I said, "Simasen, simasen." Simasen means kind of excuse me, I'm sorry, apology. It's kind of it's a de-escalating word in Japan. I said, "Simasen," and I bowed, even more de-escalated, right? I said, "Simasen, Simasen." Now, these guys thought I was nuts. What's this guy, Guy Kokujin or Guy Jin? It's like this foreigner coming into Japan and telling you he's nuts. This isn't a good place to be. But because I was a foreigner and I was apologizing, they both looked kind of surprised. You know, what's this guy doing? And I turned to the guy who actually was bumped by the bag, the first accusation. And I said, "Simasen, Simasen, I'm very sorry, I'm very sorry." And I looked at the other guy and I said, "You've got to bow too." And he did a little bow. And the guy said, "Bow, bow, bow," something, and he walked away. So that was good so far. But then I had the guy who got kicked next to me. And then I said to him, "Simasen, Simasen." I apologized to everyone. So there was a role that hadn't de-escalated. I took on the de-escalation. That's a new word. De-escalation. I took on the de-escalation, and we actually brought it all together, which was surprising. So de-escalation can be a very, very powerful tool. I've been in situations also when there's conflict between two people, and finding the de-escalation and bringing it down so that you can start talking about it becomes a very important tool. And so noticing escalation, noticing de-escalation is valuable. Just a little comment. Apologies are good, but not that good. They're not really sufficient. Apologizing for something is, I've got a terrible example, so forgive me, but I'm going to say it. Say you go home to your partner and you're saying, "I'm sorry, or whatever, but I slept with somebody. Sorry about that." That's just not going to cut it. You know what I mean? It's not enough. It's a good beginning. That you feel bad about it is a good beginning, but it's not a good ending. So you've got to know that apologies are a good beginning, but they don't fully explain what's really going on. They're a beginning of it. They de-escalate, but they don't resolve. That's the danger with de-escalation. You can de-escalate without resolution. That's not the task. Except if you're in Narita Airport and the guys don't know each other and they hit each other, then it's good just to de-escalate. There's no resolution that's necessary. But in many conflicts, you need that de-escalation. Okay? The next thing I want to share is third parties. So third parties for me are very, very important. For example, and I've seen this happens a lot of times in organizations. Say Megumi and I are working in an organization, we're friends. And say Ron says something to me about Megumi. Now I go to Megumi and I say, "Megumi, I just need to let you know that, but you can't say anything to anyone about it, but someone is saying something to you that is hurtful about you. And now we've just created the biggest paranoia that Megumi's ever had, because she doesn't know who it is. She doesn't know exactly, even if she knows what it was said, she doesn't know how many people are saying it. She doesn't know what's going on, and she has no recourse because I'm being her friend. So can you see, I'm not really being a very good friend. So the use of third parties essentially is an attack on the other. I'm using Ron to attack Megumi in the pretext of being her friend. Can everyone see that? What I should be doing, if I was Megumi's friend, is when Ron comes to me, or even a colleague, you don't have to be a friend, Ron says, "I'm unhappy about Megumi." I say, "Wow, that sounds really difficult, Ron. How about you and I go speak to Megumi together? Do you need that support?" He says, "No, I just want to talk about it." I'd say, "But then I've got trouble with you, because then you're just gossiping to me, and that's not going to get us anywhere. So let's go and resolve it." Can everyone see that? So third parties are a weapon, and it's a great weapon, and it looks benevolent, and it's actually quite violent. So if someone uses third parties, and often people do, gossip, etc., can be very hurtful to the other person without you even being conscious of it. And being nice to another person doesn't mean telling them that someone hates you, but you can't tell them who or where or what. But it's in the organization. Okay, 3 sides of conflict. Remember, in every single conflict, there are 3 sides. When I say 3 sides, there's your side of the conflict, there's the second side of this conflict, and there's a third side which is bigger than and sees the whole thing. As much as I believe I'm right, believe it or not, the other person also thinks they're right. It's funny, isn't it? I often think, well, I'm right. And then they think, well, I'm right. And I think, well, someone's not right. And it's probably both of us. There's something that is able to see the whole conflict from a bigger perspective in terms of managing it. A couple of other brief things is role theory. What's really interesting is that often the people that I'm upset with because of the way they behave are me in another moment. And one of the best exercises I have is to switch roles. So if someone is having a lot of trouble with someone or each other, switch over, but genuinely get them to really try and take the other side. And invariably they can see their view of it, and often it changes the conflict because there's insight. Can everyone see that? So understanding that often these roles are just temporary interactions, and we can be on either side at different moments, and also gaining insight into them becomes really valuable. The other thing is that, and as much as I dislike this, what I've found to be true when I say secondary figures is often the other person reminds me, when I look more carefully, of a part of me that I don't like. And it's convenient to put it on the other, because if I didn't put it on the other, I'd have to take responsibility for it myself. That's why difficult social figures are kind of relieving for the culture, because you can blame them for that which you don't want to take responsibility for. And I won't go into politics in the United States, but you might have a sense of what I mean by that. Okay, so really taking responsibility for it. The last thing is channels. I'm just going to mention it very briefly, is that because things are subtle and nuanced, people communicate in non-verbal ways. Only using verbal ways of identifying accusations limits the communication, because it could well be non-verbal. So being able to pick up the non-verbal communication becomes really, really valuable. Now, we don't have time to go broadly into it, but this conflict, we did more about it in the previous presentation, but this model can be worked with not only in two-party conflict, but in groups as well. And so just knowing that we can apply this very accusation, whether it's between an individual or between a group. And the idea of almost all conflict is to bring out both views and align interaction towards greater insight for one, and hopefully both parties involved or both groups involved, and provide them with greater opportunity for growth and development.
Stephen,
Sure.
can you just say a little more about the secondary figure? That's
Secondary
the one
figure,
that's
sure.
A bit difficult for
Okay,
me to,
of course.
I can understand the role theory and the channels, but why am I interested in the secondary?
As a facilitator, they're invaluable, because often we will be in conflict with members of our group for personal or interactive reasons, a momentary interaction, or because of what they represent to us. So if we have a history of a difficult situation, and we go into a group and that person reminds us of that difficult situation, we are now in trouble. And it's very easy. You know, I had a simple thing on the way here. You know, I caught an Uber here. I don't like Uber as a whole. I tend to go with Lyft in the States, but you don't have that. But I caught an Uber here, and the guy, it was very interesting, because the guy who picked me up was a Nigerian guy. And I got in the car and he was a bit gruff. And I started being quiet. And I was sitting in the car being quiet, doing my own thing. And then I started in my mind creating all sorts of stories about him. Yeah, look, he looks a little rough. He's a bit tough. I hope I'm okay. You know, all sorts of projections. And then we started, and then he said something. I said, what were you saying? I said, where are you from? He says, Nigeria. And I said, wow, I'm an African too. I was born in South Africa. And we had this incredible discussion. And at the end of the ride, he was my closest buddy. So what happened to this guy that was the bad guy? It was all my stuff. I'd created this whole scenario based on previous history of gruffness that I'd picked up in his voice. Can everyone see that? Now, so you can see how much we place on the other parts of ourselves, my own gruffness, that I have trouble with, and then blame them for it.
Or your experience of gruffness.
Or historically, my experience of gruffness from the past. But let me tell you how I place it on the other, because that's the one that I think Ron was asking about. Probably my deepest example of this was when I was working for the United Nations, and I was going across to former Yugoslavia to work, and I knew that I would meet people who were genocidal. And I thought that's probably the hardest thing for anyone as a facilitator to work with. And what happened is I was on the aeroplane and I thought, I'm not going to be able to facilitate this. How can I facilitate a conflict between genocidal people? I have a history in my family. I'm Jewish, and most of my family were killed in the Holocaust. So I know all about genocide from that side. And I thought, how can I work with people? And that's a clear, legitimate reason. You know, I can't work with them because of my history. And then what happened is I kept working on myself. And I said, Stephen, you're caught. What's going on? And then I realized that I'm a white South African. Now, being a white South African in racist South Africa was about as close to genocide as you get. It was a really oppressive form of the diminishment and the destruction of a whole race of people, which were the majority in South Africa. And I was, although I wasn't an active participant, I was a participant in it by virtue of being part of the culture. So now suddenly, when I realized that, I realized, gee, it's me I'm upset with. You see, because that's not my values. Can everyone get that? And as much as I wasn't explicitly in it, I was complicitly in it. In my time in South Africa, and I can legitimize it in a myriad of ways about leaving, running away, not fighting the military, whatever it might have been. The truth is I was complicit in it, and I need to own that. Now, once I owned that, my relationship to those genocidal people I met changed, and I was able to facilitate the group. Can everyone see that? In other words, the part that inside them that I was in reaction to, that secondary figure, was a part of me that I had repressed. Okay? Yeah, Annie, sure.
How this applies to adults and children. Like
Yes.
we're just-
Yeah, then you're going to have the rank issue that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
So you're going to have, if you're the adult and they're the kid, you're not on neutral territory. So you're going to have a whole lot of stuff as the adult, and they're going to have a whole lot of stuff as the kid in that interaction. So for example, by virtue of you being the adult, they might have difficulty telling you things. Or you might dismiss it because you think, oh, you think your problems are big. Wait till you grow up. You know, it's so easy to get caught and dismiss things. It was not use your rank and your power really well as an adult. Or not listen to the kid by virtue of it. Or think, well, they don't really know. You just listen to me now and pull them along. So there's so many ways in which conflict is not neutral. And so we need to be mindful of the various rankings in it and also the voices that have difficulty coming up, the edges that are present by virtue of those ranks. Is that helpful, Hannah?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, fantastic. So I have an exercise for you, so I'm going to read through it. All right. Think of a situation where you're accused of something. It might be a direct or indirect accusation. Now the assistant, there's two people, assists in exploring the accusation and helps the person working to be as clear and as straight as possible with the accusation. If necessary, the one being accused can first defend themselves, deny it, or allow themselves to feel that it's not all of them. The accused takes time to do the following inner work with the help of the assistant. See if you can find some truth in it, even a small amount. So we're going to practice the very thing that I've been suggesting. Find where the accusation is true, at least 2%. How is there truth to that accusation for you? And discover why it's valuable. So for example, when I realized my own genocidal nature, it was incredibly valuable because it opened my heart to other people. And there was a tremendous play that I watched called 2.5 Minute Ride, where after the Second World War, a Jewish interrogator was interrogating people to determine if they were Nazis or not. And he just sent someone away and he knew that person would be killed. And he said, when he relayed the story, he said, at that moment, I was so grateful that I'm Jewish, so I wouldn't have been put in that test, because I would easily have been that man doing the exact same thing I had done, given the context. It's very easy to look at the other person as the wrong and not see that part of ourselves. So discover why it's valuable. It creates humanity, creates a bigger heart, at least for me in that moment. And then after the accusers picked up the accusation, Does that in any way change the feelings towards in the accuser? What happens to the accuser once the accused picks up the accusation? What do you think happens? So when people have heard you, do you notice you soften? Something changes in the relationship. So if you're able to pick up an accusation, really grow and develop from it, there's an incredible opportunity for your growth in profound ways, and also the other person is relieved. Okay? You want to try that exercise for 10 minutes? That's all we really got, folks.
So you two go.
I'm trying to think, I've never been accused of that. No.
Have you